Welcome to the Empowerment Hour podcast, your digital classroom where individuals across all ages, backgrounds, and career levels tune in to get their weekly dose of inspiration and motivation. It's where passion and purpose intersect. I am your host, Nancy Ruffin, the self-proclaimed Latina Oprah, and your very own personal success coach. My goal is to help you discover your purpose and take inspired action so that you create a life where you feel fulfilled and empowered. So if you're ready to start living on purpose, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hey! I don't know what it is about this song and my intro, but it really gets me grooving. Happy Mother's Day to all of my listeners who are mothers or who have just had the privilege of caring for, raising, nurturing, loving a child. Okay, happy Mother's Day. It is a celebration of love, right? That's really what it all boils down to. Being able to take that day and acknowledge our mothers and all they mean to us, what they represent in our lives. And for those of you whose moms may have passed on and are no longer here in the flesh, let this day also be a reflection of the legacy they have left behind for you, and how you can bring some of what they've taught you and what they've instilled in you into the world, right? You know, women, mothers, we're nurturers. We are really the ones that make the world go round. And so I just hope that you all had a fabulous day. I hope that you took some time for yourselves, you know, because this mothering thing is a 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365-day job, right? There are never any days off. But what we hope to get is maybe some time in between where we kind of just remember who we are and we take the time to just love on ourselves a little bit and give ourselves the necessary breaks that we need to regroup, to refocus, and to really be the role models that our children need us to be. So for me, I spent the day, of course, with my family. It was a day of just driving all over town because when you're my age and you have an abuela that thankfully is, you know, still alive, and you have a mom and you have a mother-in-law, Mother's Day really is a celebration of them. And I kind of take the back seat to that. So we spent the day just, you know, with our loved ones. I visited my mother-in-law first. We spent some time there with her, and the kids really enjoyed just, you know, being around her and my father-in-law. It was always great to just see them interact. And then we headed out to Brooklyn to visit my abuelita. And so everyone was there. My parents were there, my sister and her family, my aunts, uncle. So it was just really a day of being together and just loving on the woman who created us all, really, because had it not been for her, my mother wouldn't be here. And if my mother weren't here, I wouldn't be here. And if I weren't here, my children wouldn't be here. So it's all about just appreciating our elders and their contribution to not only our lives, but to the world, and remembering all of their contributions, especially when they're older. And my grandmother, I think she is 94. She might be turning 95 this year. And God bless her. You know, she is not as healthy as she used to be. She is suffering from dementia, and that is hard to watch. It's hard to be around someone that you love so much, and sometimes they're not in their right mind, right? They're starting to lose their memories, and they don't remember certain things. And thankfully, she has not yet forgotten who we are, per se. She gets confused sometimes, and so she will be talking to me and saying things that she would say to my sister. For example, she'll ask me how my son is doing, but I don't have a son. My sister has the son. I have the two little girls. Sometimes, she'll ask me about my husband, but she'll really be talking about my sister's husband. And so, she still remembers me, but it's like other details she gets confused with. And that's hard. This was a woman who, for a really long time, was very independent. She took care of her entire family. She was really, very healthy, and still physically she's healthy, but, it's her mind, man. And to watch someone unravel in that way is tough. And so I know for me, it's really important that I see her as much as I can, and I spend as much time as I can with her, and that's hard though, because when you think about all of the things that I'm doing, the fact that I also have a family of my own, and my daughter's at an age where every single weekend there's a new activity that she has going on, it's hard, and I don't get to head out to Brooklyn to see my grandmother as much as I would like to. But with that being said, it's like no excuse, because she is 94, right? And by all accounts, the average person doesn't live that long. And so I know soon she will be, won't be here. And so I try to do my best to spend as much time as I can with her. Yeah, so that pretty much was my day. Looking forward to this upcoming week. I have so many exciting things, coming down the pike, especially for the podcast. If you guys have been following me on social media, then I am launching a monthly live series. So it's going to be pretty much what I do here every single week, except it will be live. And my first live event is taking place on June 3rd, starting at 2 p.m. at Mott Haven Bar in the Bronx. And I will be interviewing as my first guest, Phil Robinson. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Phil, on a name basis, you may be familiar with him with regard to the role that he has played in the careers of some of the biggest names in, hip hop and entertainment. He used to be Diddy's manager and used to really be his right hand at Bad Boy Records, when Bad Boy Records was the label to be at, right? So during the time where they had Craig Mack and they had Mary J. Blige. Well, was Mary J. Blige signed to Bad Boy? Not really sure, I don't remember. But Mary J. and Puff always had a really tight relationship, and I know that Phil was a part of Diddy's team during that time. But I'm really excited to have him be my first guest, because he has a great story to success. And that is really the focus of the live series, being able to tap into the brains, to the minds of some of the most successful people in their respective industry, and kind of, find out how did they get to where they got, right? How do you get from having a dream and then manifesting it into the biggest dream possible for yourself, and so we're going to be talking, about his start in the industry, about some of the struggles that he encountered, how he overcame them, what it was like, to be such a pivotal figure in hip hop and entertainment. So I'm really excited. And so if you guys have not purchased your tickets yet, you can head over to www.live.eventbrite.com and purchase your tickets, and join me for my very first live event. Your ticket will include cocktails, hors d'oeuvres, one raffle ticket. We're going to have a DJ. It's really going to be fun. It's going to be a celebration. And it'll also give you an opportunity to, be in the audience and also pick Phil's brain yourself, right? You can ask him any questions that you may have with regard to, it could be whether, you're interested in getting into entertainment, or if it's something personal as far as how do you stay focused on your dream when, obstacles and things that you don't expect arise. So I'm really excited about that. I look forward to seeing you all. And now as we get into this week's episode, I'm super excited because this week I am sitting down with Fortune 500 executive Dorinda Walker. And if you're not familiar with Dorinda, she is I believe she's a VP for Prudential. She is an inspirational woman, to say the least. Her story is one that will leave you with your jaw open. Your mouth will be just like agape, because she has managed to transform her life in the most meaningful way. This is a woman who was a high school dropout, who used to sell drugs, who at one point used to supply her parents drugs because of their addiction and their disease, right? Because that's what drug addiction is. And so this week, I am actually talking to her about that and about her newly published book, Protected by Purpose, where she recounts, her life and all of the things that she went through, all of the things that she overcame to become this woman who almost every other day is being acknowledged, is being awarded, accolades, just for all of the amazing work that she has not only done in business, but is also doing within her communities, because she is very committed to working with underserved, communities, and really just being the living, breathing example of turning your life around. And I really enjoyed speaking with her. She's very candid in the interview, in her book. If you have not purchased the book yet, I encourage you to head on over to Amazon, or you can actually go to her website, dorindawalker.com, and purchase a copy. It is a great read. It's definitely a page turner. I'll tell you that I laughed, I cried. There were moments where I felt for the little girl in her and some of the things that she witnessed, and how she really managed to rise to the top. So with no further ado, here is my interview with Dorinda Walker. This week, I am super excited to have joining me one of the most phenomenal women that I've had the pleasure of coming across. So tonight, I am joined by Dorinda Walker, and this is a woman who has it all: a great career, a great family life, and she's following the calling of her heart and living in her purpose. But it has not always been this way. Dorinda has an intriguing story. She has transformed her life from one of despair and hopelessness to one filled with purpose. She's been featured in Essence, Black Enterprise, Rolling Out, Jet Magazine, The Huffington Post. She's even been interviewed by award-winning journalist Ed Gordon, and is using her own personal story of being an at-risk youth
domestic violence survivor, and mental illness sufferer to empower and inspire others. She documents her story of survival from victim to warrior in her recently published autobiography, Protected by Purpose. So Dorinda, welcome to the Empowerment Hour. I am so excited to have you join us tonight.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be on the Empowerment Hour. Thank you for having me.
So just to give my listeners a little background on how I became aware of you and all that you have accomplished, Dorinda and I have a mutual friend, George Torres, and he absolutely loves and adores Dorinda, and he tells everyone about you. Do you know this?
I didn't know that. I love George.
Yes, he does. And I think because you are in the field of, in the business of empowering, others, specifically women. And because this is something that I'm also passionate about, like he was like, you have to meet Dorinda, you have to get her on your podcast, you need to look her up. And I was like, oh, well, okay, if George is recommending her, then yes, I have to do my homework. And that was exactly what I did. And as soon as I started researching you, I was blown away. And you recently just published, like I mentioned, your autobiography, and you really just let it all out there. You share your entire story from before you were born, from, you give the background of your great-grandparents and how the legacy of the Jones family and your legacy really started with them. So I guess talk to me a little bit about your great-grandparents and how their lives have influenced your legacy.
Sure. So my great-grandparents, they married. They were a biracial couple. My great-grandmother was an Italian woman, and my great-grandfather was a Black man. And when they married in the early 1900s, their family disowned them. Mm-hmm. So, correct that. My grandmother's family disowned her. So they had 8 children. And during the time of their marriage, my great-grandfather started using opium. And then it transferred to heroin. And 6 of their 8 children became addicts, including my grandmother, who was an alcoholic for years. And then that legacy of addiction transferred to my mother and father's generation. And both of my parents were addicted to heroin as well. So I'm proud to say that, I broke the cycle. And many of my cousins in my generation who decided that we didn't want to keep that family legacy of addiction and despair and dysfunction going on.
One of the things that you talk very candidly about in your book is your parents' drug use. And I remember there's a point in the book where you talk about when you first witnessed, I guess it was, I don't know if it was the first time, but you mentioned that you witnessed your parents really using drugs. And I think you might have been like 5 or 6 years old. What was that like for a young child to see and not really understand what was going on, but knowing that it wasn't right?
I knew that something wasn't right with my parents' drug use. Early on, I can remember them slurring their words and the nodding and the head bopping. But that image of my mother shooting up and the hypodermic needle in her arm and, the blood drawn, it stays with me forever. And at the time, I don't think I knew exactly what was happening, but I knew I wasn't supposed to see it.
Right.
And I knew it was wrong.
And that really wasn't the first time I guess from that point on, it became something that you would witness more often with other family members. Like that was not the only time you would have been exposed to witnessing someone doing drugs.
Yeah, I actually witnessed my uncle in the attic doing drugs. And he said to me very calmly, and he kept shooting up. And he said, this is the devil. This is a demon. And don't ever do it because it'll just destroy your life.
And what was that like for you, witnessing that and then having him say that to you? Do you think that registered with you at that point?
Yeah, he did not tell me something I did not know.
Right.
Having witnessed several family members who suffered from the disease of addiction, I knew the turmoil and the disappointment they had with themselves because they couldn't beat their addiction. And, as a teenager, I didn't really understand that it was a disease. I thought, that they made a conscious choice and that they could just stop when they wanted, but that's not how addiction works.
Right. And you even mentioned in the book that addiction really is 50% your genetic predisposition to that. So if you have family members that, have been addicted to drugs, there's 50% chance that you could become addicted. And you also say that the other 50% has to do with how well you cope with certain tragedies and traumas. And you have had your own fair share of trauma in your life, in your childhood, in your teenage years. You talk really candidly about domestic abuse and suffering, to domestic abuse at the hands of your mother's boyfriend at some point. What do you believe prevented you from not falling into the same trap of addiction and drug use?
I was adamant that I didn't want to be a drug addict. I didn't like the way my mother looked and some of my cousins looked when they nodded, and they were beautiful women, appearance-wise on the outside and on the inside. But that addiction just made them ugly, and I didn't want that for myself. I never did. And it was ironic that I would get caught up in the drug game as a dealer.
Let me tell you that when I read that, I was like, OMG. Like, first of all, like, I have visions of New Jack City and, like, the glamorousness that we associate really with that, but not understanding the danger really behind that. I mean, how did you navigate through that? Were you not afraid? Did you not care? Like, walk me through a little bit of that, as your younger self. What was going on in your head?
Honestly, my younger self was fearless. And in a bad way, because I was, quite frankly, stupid.
Right.
And, I didn't care if I died. I didn't care if, I got beat up. It was just, I wanted, the fast money. I wanted to hustle, and I wanted to be able to provide for my dad, who was dying at the time, his heroin. And, I was one of those girls. When you look at New Jack City, I was one of those girls with the door knockers and the salt and pepper earrings, and, would partner with my cousins to set guys up. And,
right.
There was a lot of stuff I did, which I didn't want to glamorize in the book because that wasn't what it was about.
Right.
But when you grow up in the hood and, you're faced with survival,
right,
you do what you need to do.
First of all, one of the things that I love about your book are the Dear Reader segments, like toward the end of each chapter, where you kind of go into a little bit more of like your feelings and your thoughts based on the chapter that you've just written. And I think this might be the end of the second chapter, where you're speaking about your mom and your parents and her decision to follow your dad in the drug journey, because he was the one that kind of put her on to the heroin.
Yeah.
Right. And you talk about how women, often blinded by their love of a man, do things either to undervalue their worth, or they accept behavior that they know they shouldn't because they love, this man. How do we teach, I guess, our daughters or nieces, granddaughters, or any of the young women in our lives to be strong and really not follow or be blinded by the love of a man, so that we're not relinquishing our self-love or our self-worth just to be with someone?
I think first and foremost, we have to raise our daughters to understand and believe and know that they are good by themselves, right?
Yes.
The man that they choose to be with, or who chooses to be with them, because I am a firm believer that men choose their wives,
Right.
should be someone who supports you and uplifts you, and is not so codependent on you that they can't function without you. And then you need to be strong enough in who you are, and as a woman, to stand up and live in your righteousness, in your purpose, and not succumb to failure to cope because something happened with that man, or that man is trying to entice you to do something that you know goes against who you are as a person. And, I did write in the book that, my mother's choice to follow my dad in his drug journey was the decision that she regretted most in her life, because she aspired to be a musician. She had a beautiful voice. And, it was just, when I reflected on her and who she was as a woman, it was very therapeutic for me. And you probably could tell that in the book,
Yes.
as I talk about what I think she must have felt like when she experienced so many different things in her life because of the addiction.
There are so many themes that run in your book. There's the theme of legacy. There's the theme of healing, of forgiveness, and of faith. There's so many of these things that just kind of tie the entire story together. And I guess, you talk a lot about your own, I guess, lack of self-worth and self-esteem in the book as you were growing up, right? How were you able to change that so that you then were able to transform your life? Because I think in order to make those changes, we at some point have to believe that our lives are worth something. So how are you able to make that transition?
I had to find my faith. And it was really hard for me. And so I tell people probably took me 40 years to really find and understand it. And it's not about religion. It's about knowing that there's a higher power that has your back.
Yes.
And when you step into that door of the unknown, that person will be with you and will make sure that you can succeed. And even if you fall down, having the faith to understand what lesson you were supposed to learn, because all of those challenges that I faced as a young teenager and child was the test to bring me to the testimony I have today. It was those lessons provided the foundation I needed to be a strong woman, to be able to create a career in corporate America and a GED education, doing what I love for a Fortune 50 company in financial services.
Yes.
Which is hard for any woman, but particularly a Black woman.
And, you also talk about, and we're going to shift a little bit from like the book and into your current position with Prudential Financial. You're currently the VP of their consumer strategy and key initiatives at their New Jersey corporate office. Yes?
So I have a new title. I am vice president of cultural insights for brand marketing and advertising.
Okay. So, all right. So then I guess I know this question is going to be, if I'm going to be correct in what I was going to say, but is it this role that you created for yourself, or was it the last position that I just mentioned? Because
it was the last. It was the
creating your job, basically.
Yeah, it was the last position, but my new title is an evolution of that work. So in 2009, I was on a co-chair of a business resource group, Prudential's Black Leadership Forum, and I kept hearing the same thing, that Prudential needs to do a better job. And not only Prudential, all financial services companies need to do a better job of marketing to people of color and women.
Right.
So I said, instead of talking about it, I'm going to do something about it. So I wrote a proposal. I presented it to two executives. One of them, both of them agreed to support it. One became an executive sponsor, and I kind of did it as a side job. We started out just by creating this grassroots community of employees, and we provided educational forums. And then the businesses took a hold, and we created a business case, and then the COO approved the department in 2012. So, through doing the work that I was passionate about, I was able to create a career for myself that I truly love and enjoy. And it allows me to pay tribute to my great-grandfather on my my maternal side, sorry, because my great-grandfather immigrated from St. Kitts at the age of 16 to Newark, New Jersey. He became a prominent businessman. He owned a music school where Sarah Vaughan went and other jazz greats. He owned 2 supper clubs. He owned property all around the state. And he died in 1940. And by the time my mother was born in 1953, there was little to no evidence of his legacy because his wife and her second husband squandered it.
Right. So you've really been committed, I think, in your own life and in the choices that you have made to really changing the legacy of your family in all areas, right? Because you've broken the cycle of drug addiction. You are in the financial industry, and I'm making wiser financial decisions so that you can leave something behind, I would imagine, for your children, grandchildren, or for those who succeed you.
Exactly. I do believe that part of my purpose is to take the narratives of my family's experience, share them, and put in work to change that for my family. I do believe that's part of my purpose.
And I know that you're also really dedicated and committed to empowering others and to helping other, specifically like young women on their own journeys. And you've been recognized for some of that work, and so is that attributed to, I guess, all of the strong women that you had in your life that really helped you along the way in your journey?
It absolutely is. Not only women, but the men also, because there were men who played significant roles in my life, including my husband, who's been my rock and my backbone. But, it's not a coincidence that I am where I am today. When I look back at my life, around 30 years ago today, I woke up in a psych ward after attempting suicide for the second time because I didn't think my life was worth living. And to fast forward and look at my life, I'm happily married. I have 3 beautiful children, a grandchild, and a successful career. And I'm now known as an international empowerment speaker. I have no choice but to give back. And when I give back, the reward is so great.
Oh my God, isn't it? It is.
I enjoy it.
And do you find now that the work that you do is less about you, right? And more about what you can do for others and how you can help someone else kind of succeed on their own path and journey?
Oh, yes.
I find that that's what a lot of that empowerment work really is. It's less about ourselves and more about how we can help others and be of service.
I wrote about that in the book because for a long time I was chasing the title and the status and the money, and it wasn't coming. And then when I changed my focus and said, okay, I'm just going to focus on how is my work helping to empower others, all of the blessings, I got the title, I got the, the raise, the salary. And what I learned from that experience is that I had to prove that I was worthy of the things that I was asking for.
And so I guess as you move forward in your life, in your career, and you look back at all that you've overcome, right? I mean, what would you say is your most proudest moment? What are you most proud of up until this point? Because there's still so much for you to do left. But up to this point, what would you say has been your proudest moment?
I think by far, having my children has been the greatest joy and accomplishment of my life. I have 3 beautiful children who all have these vivacious, different personalities. But, when I look at them and their life, because they're all grown now, it gives me great joy. I have a granddaughter, which is, being a grandparent is the greatest thing ever. I tell people it's better than being a parent because you can just love on those children and give them back.
Yes, the give back is always the best part of that, isn't it?
Yes, but you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about making all of the right decisions,
right?
Because you trust that their parents will do it, the children that you raise. So it's a wonderful thing. And I would just like to say, secondly, I think one of my proudest accomplishments career-wise when I was chosen as one of the top 25 Black businesswomen in the country and mentioned by Forbes as a top speaker and leader. Because I never imagined that for myself, and I had to pat myself on the back because I know that that's a great accomplishment.
So I'm curious because you're so open and so candid with your life, and you work for this Fortune 500 company. Were you not concerned that sharing your life story would I somehow damage your standing, in your role at Prudential or your career in any way?
Absolutely. When I started telling some of my peers, they said, "Girl, don't you tell nobody that you want to get fired."
So how did you manage, I guess, to navigate through that and to say, you know what, I'm going to share my story anyway?
Because, I have to credit a dear friend of mine who we were at a women's empowerment conference that we were sponsoring at Prudential. And she came up to me and she said, "Dorinda, do you realize that all of these women are asking me to introduce you to them and they look up to you?" And I'm like, "Well, why do I look like I'm unapproachable? Why don't they just come say hi?" And she's like, "Dorinda, you made it. You're that female leader that you used to look up to and aspire to be. You made it." And it was in that moment that I realized that I was still carrying baggage and shame about my past when I had already been God qualified.
Yes.
So if God qualified me to be in that position, I didn't need to worry about what other people thought about me. So that gave me the freedom to go ahead and write the book.
Wow. And so do you feel then, as soon as you came out, for far of a better term, once you really came out and owned your story and shared it, that is when all of these other doors and opportunities started to open for you?
Absolutely. But the biggest learning that came out of that was everybody has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And when I shared my story, it allowed people to open up. Absolutely. I remember the first time I shared my story, it was at a women's luncheon. It was about 200 women at a church. And I was scared, but I sat there and I gave my story for 30 minutes, and literally 50 women stood in line and waited up to an hour to speak to me. And the first woman said, "No one knows this, but I've been contemplating suicide. But after hearing your story, I know that's not what God wants me to do." And that was affirmation that the story needed to be told. It needed to be shared. And it was so many times that I heard stories like that, whether it be from young adults or teenagers, and from both men and women who were holding on to things that they really needed to talk about for their own healing.
Because it's something, right, how we carry our parents' baggage with us, right, when we don't need to, right? But we've been so accustomed to doing it, especially if you've been doing so from childhood. Once you become an adult, it almost becomes a part of you. You don't even realize that you're carrying that baggage, until something happens and you're like, wait a minute, it's time for me to let this go.
Yeah. And I have to say that I'm lucky because both my parents wanted better for me. Mm-hmm. They didn't want me to hold on to their baggage. In fact, I wrote about in the book there was a time I thought my mother was dead because she didn't want me to suffer the consequences of her addiction at that point in time. So, I understood that I could not carry their burden.
One thing that you were great at doing in the book is just capturing and showing your parents' humanity and the love that they had for each other, the love that they had for you, despite the addiction that they suffered with, and they really battled for the majority of their life. There was just so many times when I was reading the book and just the interaction with your dad, and you talk about the a fashion show that you had, and how he kind of went all out to make sure that you were like the best dressed one, and he sat proudly in the front row. And it was like, despite the fact that he was dealing with so much, he still just loved his little girl, and he did everything that he could to make sure that you knew that and that you felt that. And the same with your mom. You were able to capture that so perfectly. How were you able to forgive them, right, for the other things that you had to kind of endure as a child?
You know what? It was easy for me to forgive them as I became a conscious adult, because I understood that they were addicted. They had a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And if they had a chance to do it again, they would have never have used heroin. So I could not hold that against them, and I had to forgive them.
How difficult was it for you to write the book? Because you have to relive a lot of those experiences. Or what was it difficult at all for you?
I have to tell you, I cried. My husband would come and say, "You need to stop typing because you can't stop crying." And I'm like, but it was so therapeutic, because writing a book forced me to have to think about what it would be like to be in their shoes and what they must have felt.
Right. And don't you have, and as a parent now yourself, and a grandparent even, don't you see things now with a different lens where you can kind of put yourself almost in their shoes because you are a parent?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And being able to really pay tribute to my mother in the book was a blessing for me, because I know that her addiction haunted her whole life. And for me to be able to show her humanity and the love that she had as a woman, despite of. I think, I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers, and, this one woman said to me that her parents were addicts, and she couldn't forgive her mother, even though her mother was recovered.
Right.
And after reading my book, she reached out to her mom. So if I can help people to heal through this journey, then it's all worth it.
Were you worried at all what I guess family members would say in you sharing your story?
Oh, yeah. Please, some of my family members were blowing up saying, I don't have a right to tell it. I shouldn't tell family secrets. And you know what? I had to put all of that to the side and say, you know what? This is my story. This is my testimony. And after they read the book, they realized, I wasn't bashing family. I talked about the love we had as a family, but how we had to overcome certain challenges. So I think they're now proud of the work, and I'm happy to see the reaction that I'm getting from my family.
Yeah, it really is a page turner. I would encourage all my listeners to go out there and get this book. I mean, it's full of just every emotion. There are moments where I was laughing. There are moments where I was crying. I mean, it's just such a human story that anyone can relate to, even if your family is not plagued by, addiction. Just thinking about the struggles that families have to overcome, no matter what they are, it lends itself to that. And so I guess I don't want to keep you any longer because we are kind of coming up on our time, and I appreciate that you took the time to sit with me and chat. But if you had one piece of advice to offer a young person that finds themselves at the crossroads in their life where they feel like their life it is worth nothing and they're contemplating, giving up, what would you say to that young person?
I would tell them that they're worthy, that this is just a test, and how they choose to cope with it is going to help them in the future. So I would tell them never give up on who they are and themselves, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm living proof of it.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dorinda, for taking the time to sit with me and chat. I wish you continued success. Let my listeners know how they can find you, how they can connect, and where they can purchase your book.
Sure. So the book is called Protected by Purpose. It's available on Amazon, Walmart, eBooks, Barnes & Noble, or on my website, you can get a link to it as well. If you follow the hashtag Protected by Purpose, you'll see everything that's going on with me. I'm right now in the midst of a 12-city empowerment experience. I kicked off in Dallas, just finished up New Jersey. Next stop is Chicago and then Atlanta. And I'm really excited about that. And I can be found at Dorinda Walker on all social media channels.
Wonderful.